All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining me. We'll go ahead and get started here. If you got your questions, go ahead and post them to below the video for a smart screen or to the right of the video if you're on a larger screen. Hopefully, everybody had a great weekend. So we'll go ahead and get started here with Mark. So Mark says, hi, I just tried some of the tips. Oh, sorry, I think I spoke too soon. Charlie, sorry, we'll start here with Charlie. So Charlie says, I just purchased the Ball Then Turf Masterclass. The very first drill calls for spraying a line in the turf. Will a divot board work for 3 drills in section 1? Really, all you're wanting is something that tells you where you're hitting the ground. So, we assume that not everyone has a divot board, even though I think everyone could benefit from having a divot board for sure. So, Clay's probably just using, methods that we think that everyone could be able to do. If you're on a mat, you can use like masking tape. Put that on the mat. If you are, if you have a divot board, you can certainly use a divot board. We just want to be able to see where we're hitting the ground in relationship to the ball, right? So I would just kind of think of the, the ahead of the dot or on the dot, that would be ahead of the line, right? So if you're getting that, then you're going to be good to go. All right, let's keep going. So we'll answer Mark's now. Says, I just tried some of the tips from C122, Ben Hogan's Magic Elbow, and it was very helpful with my irons. Are these adjustments I should make to apply the Magic Elbow in my driver? I'm not 100% certain of what is talked about in that video. Unfortunately, I don't have every video on the website memorized for what's in there. So I apologize for that. But I would imagine so. If I'm trying to think of, what Ben Hogan's doing with his elbow, his trail elbow, it's, externally rotated and it's keeping it tucked all the way down. So he kind of brings it up and then it's externally tucked and comes all the way down. That applies to whether you're hitting an iron or a driver. So I'd say all full swing shots, if that's what it's referring to. If it's not, then I'm not really sure. But I would imagine you'd be safe to be able to use it with your driver as well. Really, there isn't that much difference between a driver swing and iron swing. It's more about the intent and what you're trying to do, right? So an iron swing, we're trying to hit down and through the ball because we're, those are shots that we're hitting from the ground, right? And then for a driver swing, we're trying to get that ball to go as far as possible, right? So we're trying to hit up on it, right? So we can get that high launch, low spin, right? So the techniques that you're using, the differences in techniques, it really has to go with that. So, typically the driver swing's a little bit wider. Why is it wider? Well, it's wider so that way we can shift harder, right? I can shift harder and be able to create a little bit more momentum and speed. It also makes it easier if you're wider to be able to stay behind it, because I want to be able to stay behind the ball so that way I can hit up on it, right? Narrower for an iron, I don't need to generate as much power, but I also want to be able to get my body to move laterally more forward so that way I can get the bottom of my swing to be more forward so that way I can hit down on it, right? So that's really the main difference. We do need to generally shallow the club a little bit more. So, that elbow move that they're talking about, that helps you to shallow out the club if I'm doing that tuck number. So if anything, you may even need to do that move a little bit more exaggerated with the driver to be able to get the ball to get the club to shallow out a little bit more. And just to elaborate on that, the reason why we have to shallow out the club a little bit more with the driver is because the ball position's more forward, right? So I have to get my path working a little bit more to the inside. When the ball position is more forward, the club's going to tend to want to work more to the left, more out to in, as you get to the ball. So we need to swing a little bit more into out to basically compensate for that. All right, let's keep going. So John B says, hi Q, should we try to keep the biceps mostly connected to our chest and start the takeaway with our shoulders and back, or begin the takeaway with the arms and then turn the chest and shoulders? I also believe that Clay said that the first move back should be a weight shift in the trail leg. Just trying to understand how to best sequence the takeaway. So it's really kind of a mix of both. The takeaway is not just all arms and it's not just all chest rotation. It's a mix of both, right? So when you're bringing this club back, right? So you think about it, if I just go only arms and there's no chest turning back, then it's this, right? And then if I go to where it's only chest and there's no arms bringing it back, then it's this, right? And that's not what it is either. So it's a mix of both. You're bringing the club back. You're bringing the club back with your arms and your chest. I would think of it more like a gear system, right? On a watch, if you think about it, if you ever seen like the inner workings of a watch, there's a lot of moving parts in there. It's not, one isolated gear that's turning. There's lots of things that are turning, right? So that's really what's happening in the golf swing is I got lots of moving parts happening. And because of that, I wouldn't overcomplicate it. What you just talked about there, it's really overcomplicating it. It's really, I would just stick to the main things that we want to have happen in the takeaway. And if we just stick to those main things, whatever else you do is really just going to be fine for the most part, right? So what that means is you're not going to be able to think about in the backswing, I'm going more arms or more chest or whatever. I would just think about what do I need this club to do, right? So what I would try to do is I would try to have more of a wide takeaway. That's really one of the main things that we like to see is a more of a wide takeaway. Because if we go all wrists, that's one of the main things that I say where people bring the club up with arms on their wrist only, and they're not turning their body. When you do that, you're going to tend to struggle getting a good turn and getting some good power. So really, that's kind of the main thing. Another main thing is kind of rolling the face open. I don't see a lot of recreational golfers who roll the face open who are able to kind of recover from that. And I don't believe I know of any professional golfers. They may exist, but I can't recall a professional golfer who rolls that face open in the backswing. So generally, we want to keep that club face kind of pointing a little bit more toward the ground as we're bringing it back. That allows that face to stay more square. And then as we get to the top, if you struggle with that cupped wrist at the top, it may be because you're kind of rolling it open in the backswing. That doesn't mean that you can't bring this club back and have the club face angle down and then have a cupped wrist at the top. That can certainly happen as well. But that could be part of it. So yeah, that's another thing I would say, breaking down that arm too much, but typically that goes hand in hand with a narrow takeaway. So as long as we're bringing this club back nice and wide, right? So I would almost think about one of the best feelings or thought processes I think of how to move the golf club is to imagine that it's very heavy. And I actually thought of this when I was, watching kids. We actually, it was a long time ago, but several years ago, me and Clay actually went to a school and we hosted this. My wife is a teacher at a school, and we went to the school and did like a golf camp kind of thing for them. And I was watching these kids swing the club, and I was shocked at like how good a lot of their swings were, right? And then some of them never even played golf before, and they're swinging. It just looked like they had great technique. And then I realized is because the club is heavy, right? To them, the club is heavy, so they have to use. They're basically forced to use, better technique. Because if they were to just try to, they wouldn't. It's not possible for them to do this with the club, right? They kind of have to shift into their trail side and throw that club back, because to them this club weighs so much. But as we get stronger, obviously we can kind of manipulate this club and manhandle it and get it to do whatever we want because we're strong enough and this doesn't feel as heavy to us, right? But if you had a club that weighed 100 pounds, like imagine how you would have to move, right, to be able to make a big swing, right? And you'd be surprised at how your technique changes very, very quickly, because of that. An axe, for example, like let's say you're chopping down a tree and you had a pretty heavy axe, right? Like the lumberjack shows, that kind of axe, a big, huge axe. Those things are heavy, right? Or a sledgehammer, right? Those are super, super heavy. So if I had something like that, I've never seen somebody chop down a tree and cast the axe. Never seen anyone do this, because you can't, right? But I see people do it with golf clubs all the time where they go like this. And what we see with people who have axes, they get that thing, they drive with the elbows, right? They have that club lag behind, and then they let it go, right? They lag it, and then they release that lag of the axe into the tree, right? And it helps to deliver more power into it. So, and they're turning their body, they're using the ground, right? They're doing all those things. But when people get a light club in their hands, they tend to do some funny stuff with it. So I would think about the takeaway more that way. Imagine the club weighed 100 pounds. How would you bring that club up to the top? I would shift into my trail side. I'd have to shift hard, right, to get some momentum moving in that direction. And then I would bring it back. Why? I wouldn't be able to do this, right? That's not going to work. I'm going to have to bring it back out wide and up to the top, right? So that's the way I would try to think about it. Trying to think about it segmentally, like now my chest moves, now my arm moves, now my wrist moves. It's not, you can't really learn how to do it that way. It's going to be very, very difficult to do it that way, to segment it like that, because things are just moving too fast, right? So think about it more athletically, like what you would do, and I think you'll be more successful with it. It'll be more intuitive for you. All right, let's keep going here. So Stu B says, hi Q. I still fight to keep my hips from coming off the butt line, but I've noticed that my swing path is slightly below the swing plane prior to impact and slightly above the swing plane after. I don't feel like I'm losing my neutral spine so much I'm swinging inside out, as much as I'm swinging inside out. If I like the result, then is it really that important to force my hips to stay on the line? No. I mean, there are tour players that don't maintain the tush line throughout the entire swing. Jack Nicklaus had early extension. You know, there are golfers that early extended. So, you know, the only thing it would be is it would be an upgrade, right? So typically, if you're, because what's basically happening, if your backside's coming off the back line, the tush line, you know, then what's happening is you're using that basically as a mechanism to shallow out the club, right? Now, there are pros and cons to that, right? The pro is that you're shallowing out the club, right? You're getting the club to shallow. The con is that you're kind of having to stand up out of it a little bit to make that happen. And when you do that, you're through impact, you're going to be a little bit more handsy because your chest has got to be moving away from the ball, right? So we kind of do this number a little bit, right? So it just requires more skill to be able to pull that off, right? So here's what we have to look at here. I don't think a lot of people realize this, but when it comes to like getting better at golf, there's really three main phases to it. You know, if we're kind of taking a look at the big picture of golf in general, you're going to have your technique, right? So technique is what I would call how you move, right? How you move. So how should you move? Well, the top speed golf system is basically technique, right? So we're talking about all the main things that we see the best players do, right? And this is what we call the 80-20 principle. So what that means is, or Pareto principle. We didn't make this up. It's just something that's been around for a long time. But the Pareto principle is basically where you take a small number of things that give you a majority of your results, right? So that's really what the top speed golf system is. It's the 5 things. If you want to throw shallowing in there, and if you want to throw speed in there, club head speed in there. Now there is some overlap in these concepts, but those shallowing and what we do to shallow out the club, those are really, with the top speed golf system, those are the things that are the most important, right, from a technical standpoint, right? You know, if you look at all the best players in the world, you're going to see every one of them moving their spine like we talked about. Now, there's varying degrees, right? But all of them are angled away, at least a little bit at rest. They're angled away at the top, and then they're more angled away as they come into contact. Now, some of them are a little less angled away than others, or more angled away, but all of them are doing it. There's no tour player that is like this at the top. There's no tour player that sways their hips way to the right. There's no tour players that pushes their hips forward and has, you know, is like this. They all are doing relatively close to the same thing with their spine. You know, when you're looking from the face on, they're all pretty much doing that. They're all getting a good turn. Now, obviously, there's varying degrees there. If you look at Tony Finau, you look at John Rahm, um, they're not getting 120-degree turn, which is like the PGA Tour average. They're not getting like a Dustin Johnson turn, right? But they're still getting a big turn. And I see they're getting at least 90 degrees. And I see so many recreational golfers not even getting to 90 degrees. And most of the time it's just because they're not turning their hips. They're just keeping their hips still and making a turn from there. So it's going to be hard to make power from there and get speed. Lag is another one. There's no tour players that I should take that back. There have been some that on a full swing do cast the club a little bit. David Toms would be one that I've seen that actually does cast the club, but David Toms probably would not be able to play in today's PGA Tour. If David Toms was in his prime right now and was like 30, I don't know exactly when his prime days were, but if it was right now, I don't think he'd be able to compete. He's just not hitting the ball far enough. He was swinging 100 to 105 miles an hour, and that's you think about it, he would be getting outdriven by over 100 yards sometimes by Rory McIlroy or by Bryson, right? If he was playing in today's professional, now he's playing on the Champions Tour, but it's just very, very difficult to compete when you're 100 yards behind your competitor, right? So yeah, that would be a big part of it. So lag, most tour players you're going to see they're lagging the club. Now some of them have like Sergio Garcia lag, and some of them have like Dustin Johnson lag, where it's not a big lag angle, but they're still lagging the club, right? There's nobody in today's modern golf that is casting the club, right? And if you are casting the club, you better be really good in everything else, because that's really what David Toms was. David Toms he hit the ball better than everybody else, like from a ball striking perspective. He just didn't have the speed with it, right? So he never hardly ever missed the middle of the face, right? And when you do that, you can get away with it a little bit, but at a certain point, you're still going to be 100 yards behind, somebody sometimes. So that's going to be a huge disadvantage. The compression line, right? Every single golfer you see, you're going to see the ankle, hip, and shoulder in a nice line. There will be a few that will have it a little bit bumped out, but a lot of times those golfers have back trouble. Jason Day would be one of those. He used to be kind of a bump out guy. He's kind of come in like that, and he's changed it. He doesn't do that anymore. And he did that because he wanted to play golf for a long time. And basically he knew if he kept doing what he's doing, his career was going to be very, very short. So, that's a big part of it. And then the release, right? There's no tour players that release the club right at the ball or just in front of the ball. They're all releasing it rough, in front, right? So that's technique. That's that's how you move, right? So that's the first piece. The second piece is skill, right? So skill is your ability to control the way that you move, right? So we have technique, which is how you move. Then you have skill, which is your ability to control the way that you move, right? And you have to have a good mix. The best golfers, they have both, right? They're top-notch technique, and they're also top-notch in skill. Now, some golfers are top-notch technique, right? So let me talk about a golfer in particular, Phil Mickelson. All right, so Phil Mickelson, from a technical perspective, he nails all the pieces of the Top Speed Golf system. He's doing all the pieces of the Top Speed Golf system. He does shallow out the club, albeit he does it late, but he does shallow out the club, right? But he is not as technically sound as most of his peers. But Phil Mickelson is very highly skilled. He's about as highly skilled as it gets. In my opinion, I think he's the highest skilled, the most skilled golfer of all time, because there's no golfer that I know of that I've watched videos of their swing and seen such a contrast between their swing and their what they've accomplished in their career, right? Phil Mickelson's going to go down is probably a top 10. I'm not sure exactly where he is on there, but somewhere in there, right? He's going to be one of the top golfers of all time, with what he's accomplished, right? But from a technical perspective, his swing is nowhere near any of the people that are up there. And I think it's because he's just so highly skilled. His ability to control the way that you move. And a lot of people don't think about golf this way because skill is not really something that you see, right? I look at it as like electricity, right? So skill is like the electricity of your swing, right? It's there, right? But you can't see electricity, right? But you're seeing the technical things that are going on. So that's typically what people go to first is, the technical things. What is wrong with my swing from a technicality standpoint? And a lot of times there aren't major things that are a problem with your swing. I get people that do the lessons with me all the time, and I'll see a guy, he'll send me, I remember not too long ago, I had a student that was 10 or more handicap. Can't remember what it was. He was a double digit handicap. I think he was basically a 10. But he had the golf swing of a scratch to a plus handicap, right? His golf swing was not the problem, right? It was one of the other factors. So from a technical standpoint, he had a scratch to a plus handicap swing. But from a skill and the other thing that I'm going to talk about here in a second, but the skill part, right? That part was, that part was lacking a little bit, right? So I had him doing a lot of skill training drills, and it got better, right? It got better, and that's the thing too. Is you get to when you have somebody like that, they've usually spent so much time working on their technique and trying to perfect their technique that they neglected the skills, and then they have trouble believing that the skills are the truth to the problem, right? So whenever they're working on skills, they're trying to change things at the same time. So I had a few times where I had to get with them and like, hey, stop trying to change your swing. Your swing is fine. It's not the swing that's the problem. It's the skill that's the problem. Let's keep developing the skill, right? And then the last part would be mentality, right? So how you use your brain to play golf, right? So that's basically the last piece. So that's there's a lot that goes into that, but it's strategy, right? How you play the golf course, how you work your way around the golf course. That's part of it. It's also, how you react to bad shots, right? So strategy, and then basically how you overcome adversity. How mentally strong are you to keep going, and things like that. So those are all, those are all things that are a part of it. So the last piece is, or that's the last piece. So you have technique, right? So how you move, you have skill, your ability to control the way that you move. Then you have your mentality, which is basically the brain part of golf, right? Your strategy and your mental toughness, like how you get through things, right? Professional golfers, they're going to be pretty elite, on all those things. Now, obviously, some golfers, there's areas, but even the probably the least mentally strong professional golfers is still more mentally strong than 99% of recreational golfers. So just something to keep in mind there. All right, let's keep going here. Sorry, I'm trying to find where I left off. Okay, so Chip F says, "Are you familiar with Unicore swing optics camera system, and can those videos be submitted for swing analysis?" I know what it is. I mean, I know it's I guess I don't know what the camera system is, but I know I've heard of Unicore as a company. I know they make launch monitors and stuff like that. As far as submitting for video analysis, if you're talking for like the online lessons, what we use is an app. It's called OnForm. And really the easiest way to send a video to instructor if you sign up for the online lessons is to just use your phone, and send the videos through the app. That's the only way we accept the videos is through the app. Now, if you have a way, because I have had students in the past that have had like camera setups, right? So I think Swing Catalyst has like a camera setup. V1 will do a camera setup or whatever. If you have access to the file and you can get the file onto your phone, you can also send videos through OnForm has a web browser that you can send videos from your computer. So a lot of those are in a camera or are on a computer system, right? So if you have access to the actual file and the file is compatible with OnForm web system, right, then you could send it that way. But there isn't a way to take it straight from Unicore, I'm guessing. Like I said, I'm familiar with what Unicore is. I've never used that camera system, so I don't know what it looks like, how it sets up, or anything like that. Um, and to be honest with you, you don't need something like that. I think a lot of people have bought these systems, like the Swing Catalyst system and things like that. If you want something like that, then by all means. But I know they're very, very expensive, and you don't need it. You can, if you use the OnForm app, is awesome. You can get, I mean, you could use two really like the highest tier iPads, right? So you're $2,000 into iPads, and you can have a face on and a downline video, and it will be very high end. It's slow motion camera, so it'll look great, and you'll be able to analyze it right there, save it to the cloud, and do all that stuff, and you'll have two iPads that actually have resale value if you wanted to get rid of them, or something. You could even trade them in back to Apple and get money. Whereas with that system, the moment you take on that system, it is deteriorated in value a lot, and then you're going to have to find a special. There's not as many buyers for that kind of system as there is for an iPad. So that's why I recommend, even if you got like an old phone, like a older iPhone or a couple of them, you wouldn't even need that. You only really need to have one. But if you want to have face on down line at the same time, and OnForm will do that, and it'll sync up the swings and all that stuff. That's what I would recommend doing. I think it's just a better way. That's what I recommend doing. And then if you wanted to do the online lessons, you're good to go already. So that's what I would recommend doing. But if you want to sign up, I can't speak for the other instructors, but I can. If you were to sign up with my lessons, I could walk you through. If you have access to the file, and the file is compatible, right, with the OnForm web browser, because there might be, if they have their own proprietary files, then it won't work, because it's proprietary. It only works for them, which some of them do that. So if it's like a JPEG, or there's all kinds of file options. Let me see here. I'm trying to think. So MP4 is a very common one. I think there's any other. Yep, it will let me .mov files. It'll let me do that. PNG file will let me do that. That's a picture, I think. Yeah, it'll let you upload all kinds of stuff. So that's what I'd recommend. But I can't guarantee that the Unicore, you'll be able to use it for the online lessons. All right, let's keep going. So Charlie says, back to the divot board. My divots are constantly across the ball, actually about 45-degree angle. They're not dollar bill straight. What do the divot shapes mean? Well, what that means is that's the direction your club head is moving when it was hitting the mat, right? So if I'm looking at my divot board here, right? And let's say I have it and my divot is like that, right? Where it's angled in that direction, right? That means that my club is kind of coming down over the top like this, right? I'd recommend working through the 20-minute shallowing fix if that's the case. To get to the 20-minute shallowing fix, click the instruction tab and then click the 20-minute shallowing fix from there. If you're coming in and your divot is like that, right? So that way you can see how I would have to be swinging like this to make that. Very uncommon. You don't see that very much. If you are doing that, then I would just try to feel like you're coming over the top to get it to be more on track. But that's usually what that means. All right, so Calabera says at address, the club is X degrees closed relative to the arms. The club is X degrees closed relative to the arms. Should that X degree difference be maintained throughout the backswing, downswing, and contact? I ask because I noticed on a video of myself that I lose that angle during my backswing and contact that angle. Is it just about the gone? Being a lifelong early releaser, I believe I had to do this. Otherwise, I would not have been able to reach the ball. So it sounds like you're asking if the face opens in the backswing, and it absolutely does. You just have to close it in the downswing. It'd be very, very difficult. So if, let's say you made a swing where the club face stays square throughout the entire swing, it would look like this. Right? It would look like that. In order to get the club to up to the top of the swing in the proper way, we have to turn over the arms. And when I do this, that opens the face, right? So the club opens in the backswing, but the good part is you're going to do the same thing in the downswing to get the club back to the ball. So that may not be the reason. So here's what we want to understand as far as face control is concerned. Typically, what you want to look at is your grip and your wrist angles, right? So that's typically what's going to change the club face, or what's going to be working on in the club face. So if you have a strong grip, right, meaning your lead hand's more on top of the club, your trail hand's more under the club, you can actually afford to have some cupping in your wrist because the club face is still going to be in a good spot, right? So I can go over some good checkpoints for you. So in the backswing, I think this is probably an easier way to talk about it. In the backswing, if you go to club first parallel, typically what we want to see is that club face angled down a little bit, right? If it's pointing toward the sky at all, that means you're rolling open the face, and that's typically going to be the kiss of death right away, right? So we want to have that club face angled down a little bit. Now, how much it's angled down, it's really going to be, that's something you got to tinker with. But again, there's a range. I would say anywhere from basically vertical is fine to 45 degrees. If you get it like this, that's typically going to be too shut, and you're going to tend to hit hooks most likely, or try to kind of back up out of it or something like that. Or a lot of times what people will do if the face is too close is they'll do this to try to shove their hands out forward to get the face more pointing that way. So if it's too close, that can lead to issues as well. But generally vertical to just angle down somewhere in that area is going to be good here. And really, if we just bring the club back, that's where it's going to be. When you look at kind of on average, I would say matching the posture would be where it's at. So if you kind of look at my back line, right? See how my back line is kind of angled here. It's angled like that. That's about where the club face is going to be, right? About in the back line. At the top of the swing, what I like to see is the club face a little bit closed to our forearm, right? So if we look here, this would be very close to my forearm, right? If you look at look at the club face. See how it's pointing up to the sky? My forearm's pointing that way. The club's pointing up to the sky. This would be, I would say that's pretty close to in line with my forearm. All right, so maybe trying to get to where you can see. So if you look at like the leading edge, that would kind of be matching my forearm. And then if it's like that, you can see how the club face is pointing that way now, and my forearm's pointing that way. So that'd be open to the forearm. Generally, we want it a little bit close to the forearm. It's going to be in a good spot there. And that's going to come down to your grip and your wrist angle combination. I'll go back to that here in a second. When we come back to club parallel to the ground, again, we want to see that club face angle down a little bit, right? And again, it's kind of the same thing as in the backswing. This is more important because we're much closer to impact. So here's what I would say to that too. If you came back in the backswing and your club face is pointing up to the sky, but then you came down in the downswing and your club face is in an awesome position and it's moving in a great way down the ball, I have no issue with how it is in the backswing. I think that's a huge mistake that a lot of people make. They see what's going on in the backswing right? And they think, oh, that's bad. I have to fix that. Well, who cares if you're getting it down here in a good spot, right? Because odds are, if you change what you're doing in your backswing, that's likely going to change what you're doing in your downswing as well. And if you're already doing what you want to be doing in your downswing, why would you want to change that, right? So you got to be careful, with just changing something to change it, all right? Even though, that might be just like a unique thing that you do. There are outliers in everything. And I think a lot of people are trying to change things that are unique in their swing that work for them when it's not even really a problem to begin with. It's just different, right? If you look at, there's a lot of players that have unique things that going on in their swing, right? And you have to do these things, because they're unique to you, right? Focus on the top speed golf system. That's the most important things that are happening in the golf swing, right? So as far as face control is concerned, those are kind of the checkpoints. Club parallel in the backswing, vertical to angle down a little bit, up at the top, a little bit close to the forearm is going to be ideal. Impact, again, vertical to angle down a little bit. I've never seen a good player who has that club face pointing up to the sky in any amount when the club's parallel to the ground in the downswing. No amount. Not in a full swing. Now, if they're trying to hit a big flop shot with an open face, that's one thing. But on a full swing where they're trying to compress the ball, whether it's an iron shot where they're trying to compress it and control the distance, or a drive where they're trying to hit as far as possible, nobody has that club face angled up to the sky ever. And then what goes with those are going to be the wrist angles that match up to your grip, right? So if you have a strong grip, going back to that, if you have a strong grip where your lead hand's more on top, trail hand more under, right? You can afford, if I have a strong grip, I bring it here, unless I'm really rolling my face open, I'm almost guaranteed to have the club face in a good spot there. When you get up to the top, you can see I can have a little bit of cup in this wrist, and I can still have that club face close to my forearm a little bit. Now, if I get crazy with it and get it too cut, it will still be too open. But that's typically going to, with a little bit of cup with a strong enough grip, you can still have that club face in a good spot. Same thing down here, right? If I have a strong grip and I have a little bit of cup in my wrist right here, well, look, my club face is still angled down a little bit, right? Now, if I had it flat, it'd be angled down even more, right? So those are things that we have to consider. If I have a neutral grip, right? So this would be where it's basically halfway between the weak and the strong. Weak would be where, let's talk about weak first, because I think it'd be easier to talk about neutral after that. So weak is where my hands are basically on the side, right? So here, strong, lead hand was on top, trail hand was under, right? And there's varying degrees of strong. That'd be like super strong. This would be as strong as it gets, basically, right? Where my thumbs are like on the side. Weak would be where my thumbs are going down the top, right? So we have the logo here on the grip. My thumbs are going down the top. My lead hand's on the side of the grip, the target side of the grip, and then my trail hand's away from the target side of the grip, right? So if I have a grip that's really weak, I actually need to get my wrist a little bit bowed, right? So if I'm here, I wouldn't actually have to bow my wrist to here, because I can just kind of turn back. As long as I'm maintaining my posture. If I go like that, then the face will get open. As long as I maintain my posture and just bring it back, it'll be good. At the top of the swing, if you don't have some bow in your wrist, most likely that club face is going to be a little bit open or in line with your forearm, right? And then when we bring it down, we're going to need to have some bow in that wrist to be able to get that club face closed, right? So when you look at players with weak grips, they all have bow in their wrist. So that's going to be like a John Rahm, Colin Morikawa, Victor Hovland. These are all weak grip players. And if you look at them, they bow their wrist throughout the entire swing. So at the top of the swing, it's super bowed. As they come down to impact, it's super bowed, right? So if you have a weak grip and you want to keep that weak grip and you want to have a pro-like impact position, then you're going to have to bow your wrist a ton. Very difficult for most people to do. So I don't really recommend that. But if you want to keep that grip, that's what you have to do. So neutral is going to be halfway between that. So neutral, you're typically going to have more flat wrist angles, right? So if I go to the top, if I go here, I can be flat. My club's going to be angled down. If I go here, I can be flat. My club's going to be still a little bit close to my forearm. I bring it here. My wrist can be flat, still going to be a little bit close. At impact, my wrist can be flat. So now dynamically, you may need to both, because if you look at so Tiger is an example of a neutral grip, basically net flat wrist player. But if you look at him at last parallel in the downswing with the club, you're going to see a little bit of bow in that lead wrist, and then he kind of releases that bow as he comes into impact, and it's fairly flat, right? So Adam Scott would be another player that's a weak or neutral grip player, flat wrists throughout most of the swing, a little bit of bow, as he's coming down. So those would be kind of the things I'd be looking at for face control. All right, let's keep going. It goes on to say, I'll answer yours here in a second, Paul. Since we were still on Cal's. Sorry, I wasn't clear. I'm not referring to the club face. I'm referring to the angle of the club shaft relative to the angle of your hanging arms. Does that angle stay the same throughout the swing and especially at contact? No, it does not. Generally, your hands are going to be a little bit higher at impact than they are at address. But that doesn't mean that, so let's say so here's the thing. A lot of people are really worried about your setup. So here's what you want to do with the setup. Your setup, what you want to be able to do with it is you just want to be able to put yourself in a position to be able to make a good backswing, transition, and downswing, right? That's really what the setup is. The golf ball doesn't care what you do at your setup. So if you set up with your hands super low like this, and then you come into great impact position, right? The ball doesn't care how you set up. If you set up with your hands like this, right, and then you come into impact and you're in a great impact position, the ball doesn't care. It doesn't know what's going on. So that question to me, it's always a tough question because generally speaking, because you're going to have your arms most of the time, a good general setup is to really have your arms kind of hanging straight down. And if your arms are hanging straight down, you're going to tend to have the handle lower and the toe is going to tend to be a little bit higher, right? And then when you come to impact, because of physics and the way things are happening, your arms aren't going to be hanging straight down. Your arms are going to be more in line with your club, which is going to make your handle a little bit higher, right? So then is that set. But if you already set up with the handle high in the club flush to the ground, then that's generally where you're going to be. What you can do is you can draw something called the elbow plane line or the shallowing line. And this is only accurate if you set it up with the correct camera angle. So you want to make sure that you're set up down the toe line and it's about hip level and that you're far away enough to where you and the club stay in the frame. If you got that, then you'll be able to see this accurately. Once you do that, go, set it to the ball and draw a line from the ball up to the middle of your elbow. What you would want to see is you'd want to see your club at impact on that line or a little bit below it is going to be fine. If you look at address, your hands are likely going to be way below it, right? And if they're on it, that's totally fine too, as long as you're in a good spot at impact. Impact is the most important thing, and it's not even close. It is by far the most important thing. So as long as we're getting into an great impact position, the setup, it doesn't matter what you're doing in your setup as long as you're getting into a great impact position. I could care less what you're doing in your setup as long as the impact position is good and we're getting and we're dynamically moving well through impact as well, not just like the still frame of impact. Because looks can be a little bit deceiving if you're looking at a picture, but if we're looking at how we're moving into that, that's what we want to see as well. All right, let's go back to Paul C up here, or sorry. We'll go to Tom W. So Tom W says, a greenside bunker swing, how does the club path and swing plane compare to wedge shot from the fairway? It depends on the kind of bunker shot that you're trying to hit. But it can be, you could be cutting across it a little bit more if you want, or you can be having a very, very similar kind of shallow kind of swing. Either one of them can work. It really just depends on the kind of bunker shot that you're trying to hit. And the same thing goes from a fairway shot. A fairway shot, you can bring it in shallow, or you can be cutting it. It really just depends on the kind of shot that you're trying to hit. So Paul Z says, I have been hitting a lot of shanks lately. I believe my trail shoulder is overtaking. I'm swinging into out. Does this make sense? If so, what is a good anti-shank drill? I meant out to in. So what I would typically, I can go over the things that I typically see. Out to in usually doesn't usually cause shanks unless you're out to in with a very open face. Because if you're out to in with a very open face, especially hitting higher lofted clubs, then this is what's coming at the ball, right? Whereas if I'm from the inside and the face is square, right, this is what's coming at the ball. If I'm over the top and with an open face, this is what's coming at the ball. So you can see how what's coming at the ball is the hosel, right? So that's where it would be. So if that is the case, if you feel like that is what's causing the shanks, then I would work through the 20-minute shallowing fix, because that's going to get the club face more closed and the club working more from the inside. But it's pretty rare. I don't typically see that. So I'll go over what I typically see, what causes people to hit shanks. So one would just be standing way too close to the ball. If you're really crowding the ball, your hands are in your lap. There are great players that have their hands in the lap, but if you're hitting shanks, you may benefit from getting a little bit farther away. So I typically like to see about a fist width between the hands and the legs, right, at address, and that gives you some space, right? So that'd be the first thing I would look at. The second thing I would look at is how your hips are moving throughout the swing. We talked earlier about the tush line. So if you're not familiar with what that is the vertical line that's drawn on your backside here. So you can imagine this alignment stick would be drawn on the screen. It would be like this. This would be the tush line, right? So if you draw that tush line and you look at your swing and your hips are doing this, they're moving way away from that tush line. So let's say that this chair here is the edge of the tush line, and you see or maybe even in your backswing, a lot of times in the backswing, you move away from it. Maybe you're in a great spot in your backswing, but in the downswing, you move away from it. That's going to take away space, right? So if you take away space, that can push your hands in the hosel too much toward the ball and lead to that shank. So if that is the case, I would, doing a chair drill like I was just doing, where you have a chair on your backside, right hip on the chair at the top, left hip on the chair at impact, that can definitely help. It can also help to feel your weight more in your heels instead of your toes, because a lot of times if you're doing that, your weight's going more toward your toes. So those would be the things that I would be looking at. Another one would be swinging too much from the inside. So if you swing too much from the inside, shallow it too much, what can happen is the sweet spot's moving away from you a lot. And if the sweet spot's moving away from you a lot, that can get that hosel in there a little bit. So those would be kind of the main things that I would look at. The other thing that I would say is if you're in a situation where you're hitting it off the hosel a lot, you're getting a lot of shanks, odds are you're probably hitting it off the heel a lot. When you don't shank it, you're probably hitting it off the heel. Because typically how it works is when you get a shank, right, it will be heel strike, heel strike, heel strike. You get a little bit too close to the heel and you get a shank. Or, it only happens when you hit like your higher lofted clubs like wedges and stuff like that, because the hosel is much more protruded on these clubs as opposed to like a 4-iron or a 5-iron, where you're not going to have as much protrusion from the hosel. So you can actually hit more on the heel and not hit the hosel. But with a wedge, the closer you get to the heel, the more you're getting a lot closer to that hosel, because the hosel is more protruded there. So a lot of times it's heel strike, heel strike, heel strike. Then you get a little bit too close, too much off the heel, and you get that hosel strike. So if that's what's happening, then what I would do is change your intention. Change your intention to hitting the ball off the toe. Really commit to it. Set up to it the way you normally would, right? And if you're standing too close, maybe stand a little bit farther away from it. But set up to it the way you normally would in the center of the face, but intentionally try to hit it out of the toe. Some people I've seen, and this is not a very effective way, it might get rid of it on a couple swings, but it's not a very long-term solution. It's a very, very short-term, sometimes extremely short-term solution. Might even only work on one swing. I see people where they'll set up like this, right? They'll just set up with the ball on the toe. And unfortunately, that a lot of times that doesn't work, because your brain knows you're standing too far away from the ball. And subconsciously, you're going to actually reach out to the ball more, and then that's just going to cause shanks even more. So would be better if you hit it off, if you set up on the heel and then intentionally hit it off the toe, right? And you're going to have to really back up out of it to make that happen. A good way to kind of think about this as well, because a lot of people are like, oh, I'm having trouble doing that, right? Where I'm trying to hit the ball off the toe, but it's still off the heel. Well, you just got to exaggerate it more, right? So think about it this way. If I told you, if you were setting up like this. Let me get another ball here. So let's say you set up to the ball on the other side of the stick here. So I'm set up to this ball, right? Do you think you could hit this ball, right? So most people are like, yeah, I can hit that ball. Well, look what I did intuitively. I pushed my hips back and I created space so that I could hit that ball, right? So it's the same kind of thing. We just got to exaggerate and really commit to it, and you'll be able to do it. And do this in your practice. Don't just go out of the range and try this, because that can be disastrous. It's going to be very, very difficult for you to commit to something out on the course that you've never practiced before. So do that on the range. Practice that on the range, practice that at home, and then try to take it to the course. All right, let's get going here. So Ed D says, hi, Q. I just got a new set of irons, and I'm struggling with compressed contact on 5, 6, and 7. Feels heavy. What should I look for on video? Is there a progression drill you would recommend to get more comfortable with compressing these longer clubs? I have great success with 8-iron or down, and I'm hitting much farther than my old irons. Well, first of all, I would just hit those clubs exactly the way you hit your 8-iron. My guess is you might be pushing the ball position far forward with those longer clubs. That's typically what I see, and people that struggle with the longer irons is they push that ball position forward too much. And then because the ball position is too far forward, you tend to hit behind the ball because your low point isn't forward enough, right? So hit your 8-iron and then grab your 5-iron, hit it the exact same ball position, same everything, hit it the exact same way. And I imagine you will be more successful. So John B says, when I watch pros on TV making warm up or rehearsing their swings before sucking up the ball, it appears that they are rehearsing cut swings, even when they may hit a draw. Is that an optical illusion, or why are they doing that? Well, usually they're doing that because they're probably over shallowing out the club, and that's a problem. They're getting too much under it. And that's most likely what's happening. I was watching Rory on, during the US Open, and that's kind of what was happening with him, is he was just getting under it a little bit too much. So what I mean by that is when he's coming down, he was just getting the club was just kind of working too much from the inside, and he was losing some balls out to the right, kind of pushing balls out to the right. So, he was missing a lot of greens there, in that final round, because of that, because he wasn't getting his irons worked out. So that's a lot. That may be what's happening. So it's kind of like the fault, feel, real approach. The fault might be that they're getting under it a little bit too much. The feel might be where they're feeling kind of an over the top kind of motion, so they can be more on top of the ball. And then the real is usually something that's in between that. But usually they're just exaggerating a feel that they want to have, and they're trying to commit to that in their swings. So Alex says, what does a divot board look like with a draw swing and a fade swing? To be honest with you, it's not going to look that much different. It's going to look very, very similar, because if you're hitting a fade or a draw, right? So what I would say a fade or a draw is, it's going to be a not excessive curvature. So we're talking, I would say less than 5 yards of curvature would be like a draw or a fade. For getting more than 10 yards, that's turning into slice territory, right? So for a draw and a fade, right, your path on here likely is not going to look much different. You might notice for a draw, your path is slightly into out, or maybe even more straight. Because what we have to think about as well, the divot is not necessarily what the path is when you hit the ball, right? The divot is just the direction the club is moving when you are hitting the ground, right? So the club can be a little bit into out when it hits the ball, but then if it hits the ball, then the turf after that, then it may be pretty neutral after that. So your draw divot might look like that, right? It's pretty straight, right? Your fade divot might look like this, like barely out to in, right? So, a big hook divot might look like this, right? And a slice divot might look like that, a pull, right? Your path. Now, keep in mind that what creates the curvature is the difference between your face and your path, right? So in order for a ball to curve from left to right for a right-handed golfer, the face has to be open to the path, right? So just because my path might be in to out, that doesn't mean that it's going to result in a draw, right? That's what I need to do to hit a draw, but that's only part of it, right? In order to hit a draw, I need to have my face close to my path. So I wouldn't rely. I think people are probably putting a little bit too much into the divot board and what it can really do. What the divot board is really good at, and really the main function of it, and the thing that I really pay attention to for it, is the where your ground contact is starting. That's really what I would use the divot board for. I would not use the divot board for your strike location, because it's not going to be totally accurate. If you want something that's accurate, then I would use foot power spray, or I would use the dot method. The dot method is where you take a ball, you fill it up with like some ink. I would use like a dry erase marker, Expo. They make really good high quality dry erase markers. Use the bullet tip. It's like the same shape as a dimple on a ball. You fill up the dimple, you situate that dot to where it will rub off on the face when you hit it, and then you'll be able to see the very accurate portrayal of where you're hitting it on the face. So that's what I would use for that. For club path, to be honest, I don't care what the club path is. I care what the ball flight is, right? So your ball flight, let your ball flight dictate whether it's a good shot or not, because that's really what matters, right? Because if you're just focused on the path, right, then that's only going to play a small, or I shouldn't say a small role, but that's playing a partial role in what's going on with the ball flight. It's not everything. So I wouldn't necessarily use that for the divot board for that. So I wouldn't use the divot board for club path. I wouldn't use it for strike location. I would only really use it for ground contact, for where you're hitting the ground in relationship to the ball, and it does that really, really well. I also am not a big fan of using it for the shape of the divot, because when you hit this, it kind of bounces around, right? So, now I would say if you're consistently getting a divot that is not square shaped, right, then that's indicative of something. You're probably toe down, right? But if you get one every now and then, most likely it's not because you're toe down or something like that. It's just that because this is bouncing off the ground and there's high speed impact happening. It's just because this thing is not. It's basically it's rubber, right? So when you hit it, the club's kind of like bouncing, and the clubs, there's lots of things going on there. So if you watch this in like super slow motion, you'll see some things happening that are not. You may get some feedback that may make you think something's happening when it's not really happening, right? So the feedback mechanism that this is really good for is ground contact. I wouldn't use it for path or anything like that. Your ball flight, that's going to determine your path. So get set up toward alignment stick pointing at a target, and then see where your ball goes, right? That's going to be indicative of your face and path and strike relationship, right? That's really what I do. So what I would look for is your ground contact. This is what needs to happen to hit a good shot. We need ball first contact. So I would use this to see what your ground contact is in relationship to the ball. We need center face contact. I would use foot power spray or the dot method to see what that is. I don't recommend impact tape, because impact tape has an effect on the ball flight. The dot method and foot power spray do not affect the ball flight. So that's why I recommend those. If you have a launch monitor that tells you where the strike location is, that is fine as well. But those oftentimes, I shouldn't say oftentimes, but those can get some misreads and not tell you the whole story either. So I just like the dot method, especially for chrome clubs. And then your ball flight is going to tell you whether your face and path were in a good relationship, right? So yeah, I know if I hit a ball that starts to the right of my target and curves back onto the target, I know that my path was into out. I know my face was close to that path, but open to the target. If I hit a ball that starts to the left of the target, fades back toward the target, I know that my path was left. My face was open to that path, but closed to my target to get it to start to the left. If I hit a push out to the right, then I know that my face was open to the target and then my club path was into out in line with my path. And that's going to create the push out to the right. If I hit a pull, I know that my path is to the left. And then, because the reason why I know this is because I'll hit shots on this and maybe it'll show my path on here is one thing, but my ball flight says another thing. Physics is not going to lie. It'd be a center face strike and it will say, one thing, and that will say another thing, because I don't think that's real reliable for that. Very reliable for where you're hitting the ground relationship to the ball. Not super reliable for where you're hitting it on the face and things like that. I would use strike like the dot method or something like that to look at those. Right. Thanks everybody for joining me. We'll be back here tomorrow. Tomorrow is Tuesday, so 11 a.m. Eastern time. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you next time.